these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I wanted to have on Lila Rose. She's the founder of Live Action. She's a pretty incredible activist when it comes to the pro-life issue. Boy, I'm just going to read a little bit of her biography as I introduce her. It really is impressive. She's really become the face, I think, of the pro-life movement. And she started back when she was 15. After she discovered a book several years earlier with photos of children who had been killed by abortion. And she made it her life mission to really inform other young people about what this practice really is and what it really does. She founded Live Action in, I want to say 2006, but let's just have her speak and she can answer that question for me. Lila, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So when did you form Live Action?
Sure. Well, it depends what we mean by it, but I started it as a teenager, so 2006, and then we were officially incorporated in 2009. So we were kind of a local youth education group in San Jose, California. And then when I was at college at UCLA, that's when I got some legal assistance and we became officially a 501c3.
Okay. Well, when did you really take off? I mean, had you, granted, I've really only been super involved in politics since I ran for politics. But it does seem to me like Live Action and you as a real strong figurehead for this movement really took off in the last few years.
Yeah, so I think the first sort of ignition point was when I started doing investigative reporting of abortion facilities. So as you've seen yourself firsthand, most media groups are really biased and they're on the abortion issue, they're really pro-abortion. So when I was actually a college student, that's when I started doing undercover investigative reporting of abortion facilities in Los Angeles and actually of my school's health administration. And then that sort of gave me my first national exposure. I started doing, some national TV interviews about my investigative findings. I exposed abortion facilities covering up child sexual abuse of little girls. I mean, this is one of the many horrible aspects of the abortion industry. It obviously kills babies, but it also harms women and is very dishonest and corrupt. So that was the first onset. And then over the last 10 years, we've just grown and grown. And Live Action is now the digital leader for the global human rights movement of the pro-life movement. So we've been, I think, really growing. We've basically doubled in size in the last 2 years. So I think that's a good impression that you have, that there's been yet another big ignition point for us in just the last few years with our influence and really our, the reach that we have with our content.
Yeah. And I like the angle that you take. It's about love. It's about life. It's about putting young women in front as the spokesperson for this movement, which obviously makes a lot more sense. I mean, look, I don't give in to this notion that men can't talk about this. I think that's nonsense. But you also have to acknowledge that the message does need to come from somebody like you, and by somebody like me, I just mean like a young woman. I'm always telling the Second Amendment movement, you need to learn from Lila Rose. This is how you be an activist, right? It's about optimism and positivity and empowerment and empowering young women to make the right decisions. And the reason I say the Second Amendment community specifically is because I don't want to make this isn't a gun conversation, but the point is that a young woman might need to defend herself, and this is about empowerment. And the last thing you need if you're going to persuade voters is for a bunch of guys basically in Call of Duty outfits, marching around talking about tyranny, and it's just like, hey guys, I get it, I'm with you, but a terrible way to make your point. And you saw this, and frankly, you saw that evolution in the pro-life movement as well, where it did used to be a little dark and gloomy, I think, and a little bit angry. Yeah. And that's just not what you see from the March for Life anymore. It's like a really high energy, optimistic, fun, young group of people.
Yeah. And it's cool because that is the movement. I mean, we have over 5 million combined people following our content just on a daily basis, and then we do a reach beyond that. But they're mostly young women. I mean, that's what's really cool about our growing movement is despite, the lies that are being told by the establishment. I mean, there's so much corruption and the abortion industry really has so much power with all of these institutions and with the media and entertainment media and all of this. But despite that, it's really young women who are leading the charge. I mean, a lot of pro-life organizations are led by women. And then Live Action's ambassador team, our activists, they're largely women. So that's not to say men don't have a role. We need men. I'm so glad you're such a stalwart on this because, these are children who have fathers. Half the babies who are killed by abortion are little boys. It's not just a women's issue, it's a human issue. So we need representation really from everybody.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's right. What are you most worried about right now as the Biden administration takes form and begins implementing its policies? And how do you think we got to this point? Because I want to frame that in saying like it's more extreme than it has been.
Yeah, it's you're right on that. So there's two things that are most concerning to me about the Biden administration. One is more sort of it's more of an intangible, but it's really also has long-term deep cultural impact, and the other is political. So the first one, I'll talk on the political, is that's more straightforward. It's the Hyde Amendment, and Biden, for decades was saying that as a politician that he supported the Hyde Amendment. This is the federal law that prohibits taxpayer funds from directly paying for abortions. Mm-hmm. So I'm in the state of California. We're very far left. Abortions are directly paid for, even late-term abortions in this state. Children are being killed with taxpayer money, and that's state money, though. It's not federal money. So this would open the coffers, the cash flow would just go out into the abortion industry. Planned Parenthood would profit tremendously. And they estimate it would be hundreds of thousands of more deaths of children every single year. Because the reality is when a woman's in a really scared place and she's feeling overwhelmed, she's feeling pressured, she's like, what can I do? I just want to get out of this situation because she's experiencing an unexpected pregnancy. A quick fix is really tempting. But the reality is abortion is not, it might seem like a quick fix in the moment, but it has a lifetime of pain and regret because you've just killed a child. Maybe you're not really focusing on that fact in the moment because you're feeling so upset, but it's a devastating effect long-term for the woman. That being said, the Hyde Amendment means, the government just pays for it. So there won't even be a question like of money. Do I have enough money for this or anything? Women will just be encouraged. It's free. It's not like pregnancy care is free for them federally, but abortion will be free for you federally. And so it just tips the scales for death. It tips the scales for the violence of abortion. And it was just so gross and disappointing to me as a woman to see Biden, who says he's for women and, he's a progressive and he's been for the Hyde Amendment again for decades, even under when he was on, vice president with Obama. And then last year, because of pressure from pro-abortion, Planned Parenthood, and their allies, he wanted their campaign dollars. So it was really, cynical calculation. He's like, okay, I guess I have to go for their legislation to try to get rid of this and promise to do that when I'm president. So that's the one political thing that could be the most devastating, in my opinion, is his just complete sellout to the abortion industry. He is extraordinarily extreme. Any abortion is extreme. It kills a baby, but he is 100% in line with Planned Parenthood and their policy proposals.
Yeah, and the Democrat Party all in all has gotten much more extreme where we can't even get them to agree that a Born Alive bill is something we can pass in Congress. I think we introduced it like a bazillion times the last 2 years just to demonstrate, really, because we knew we couldn't get it anywhere. But just to demonstrate like how extreme this is on the left, and to frame the question of how we got here. One thing I keep hearing, and I don't have the data to support this, and maybe you do, is that Gen Z is a more pro-life generation, at least compared to millennials and maybe Gen X. Is that true? What are you seeing in trends on public opinion on abortion? Yeah. And then how do you? Well, let's start there, and then I have another data-oriented question. But what are you seeing in trends?
Yeah. So it's really fascinating when we do polling and we look at other polling that's done. So when you just ask people, like, do you support Roe v. Wade? The majority of young people, both millennials and Gen Z, the large majority are like, sure, yes. It's the status quo. Again, there's been so much positive marketing about it. Selena Gomez wearing the 1973 necklace, Miley Cyrus licking the abortion as healthcare cake. I mean, they're really picking,
gross.
It's gross, but it's so and it's so deceptive. That's why I just find it so offensive against the woman. They never say what abortion is, right? They just call it healthcare. I mean, Biden won't even actually say the word abortion anymore. He just says women's health care. So they won't even call it what it is. It's a dismemberment. I mean, anybody who actually looks at what an abortion is, looks at the diagrams of it or watches, we have content that shows you the medical, animations of what it is. They're horrified because you can see this is a human being. I mean, you can see the humanity of this little tiny growing boy or girl, and disturbs anybody, left or right, Democrat or Republican. So the only way to really support it is to block out the reality, and that's what's being done. But here's the good news. When you get more specific, when you say in polling, for example, Roe v. Wade permits abortion through all 9 months, do you support that? Then you see 20 up to 30% shift to say, actually, I don't support that. When you ask people in polling, young people, millennials and Gen Z, when you ask them, do you support abortion bans after the heartbeat can be detected? A majority support that. It's incredible. And a heartbeat can be detected at heartbeat happens at 3.5 weeks, can be detected by 6 or 7 weeks. So they're basically
is that a majority
banning all abortions.
Is that a majority of young people or majority just in the general population?
Young people.
Okay.
So what my point here is when they're given facts, and this is a recent poll from the polling company just this last month in January, when young people, Gen Z and millennials, are given actually the facts of what they are choosing to support or not support with abortion, then they actually tend very pro-life. But when you just say, oh, do you support a woman's right to choose, or do you support Roe v. Wade? They say, yes, I'm pro-choice, it sounds great. But when you describe what that is, it changes instantly. It changes the opinion. So our job at Live Action is education, because, it's a hugely uphill battle because, the school system's pro-abortion and they use the euphemisms, the false language of empowerment and choice. The Democratic Party, most celebrities and entertainment media is very much deceptive about when talking about abortion. But when you cut past those lies and the apathy that comes with it, and you actually talk about what abortion does to that baby, how it's harmful to a woman, then we see people more identify in Gen Z and millennials as pro-life.
And there's a civics conversation to be had here about what it means if Roe v. Wade were actually overturned. And, that's a huge educational, I think, fault line there. Because what people think is, well, if you overturn Roe v. Wade, abortion's just illegal. And of course, that's not true at all. Literally nothing would happen if we overturned Roe v. Wade right now. The only thing that would happen is states would have the freedom, which, constitutionally, let's be honest, they already do. Okay, Roe v. Wade is a deeply, I think, illegal and unconstitutional decision. Just forget the fact that it's about abortion. The problem with Roe v. Wade, just on a legal basis, is that it uses the Fourth Amendment to make its case for abortion. So the Fourth Amendment is basically a privacy amendment. It says, the government has no right to enter your home without due process, without a warrant, et cetera. Now, which is a really good amendment to have, I think, especially in the age of coronavirus when they want to come and bang down the door when you're having Thanksgiving dinner with your family. Fourth Amendment protects you from that crap. It does not protect abortion. Like, no one in their right mind would look at that and interpret the penumbra of the legal language in the Fourth Amendment to say that you can have an abortion as well. And just on a basic, I'm getting a little political philosophy here, but this point is important. Because the counter arguments against the pro-life movement are always, well, if you're in favor of the death penalty, then how can you be pro-life, right? And I'm like, well, easily, actually, because we're talking about innocent life, and the entire point of government is to prevent the infringement of rights from person A against person B. Okay, that's a really important point to acknowledge as a purpose of government, and this is clear in our Declaration of Independence when it says that the purpose of government is to protect your life, liberty, and property. And so, but what about capital punishment? Well, that the government's job is to prevent infringement of rights. So purportedly, the person who's being, I guess, executed, infringed on somebody else's rights in a pretty severe way. They're usually like a mass murderer or something terrible. It's the government's job to enforce that. This is not the same thing as abortion, and we can't allow them, I think, to gain that ground just on a political philosophy basis and on a civics question. And so you overturn Roe v. Wade, it does nothing. It just puts the power back in the hands of the states. And I don't think people even know that. It's like they have no idea that that's true. And that the reality is that, yeah, you would just have that fight at the state level. Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. And by the way, when a lot of death penalty opponents, and I'm personally opposed to the death penalty. So you can, I mean, a lot of
Squish.
people who are anti-abortion are
Just
also
kidding.
against the death penalty. But you can be for the death penalty as a matter of justice and opinion, and also very pro-life. So, it can go both ways. But what I rarely see is the people that criticize pro-lifers who might be supporting the death penalty or against it. I mean, there's a diversity. The pro-life movement is extremely diverse ideologically, which is awesome. Left and right, all different kinds of people. But a lot of those death penalty opponents are pro-abortion. So they would withhold the death penalty from a mass murderer, but they would give the death penalty to a child with no due process, of course, an innocent child, simply because they were not seen as wanted enough.
Right.
And I think that is really cuts to the heart of the dishonesty, quite frankly. Maybe it's not intentional dishonesty for some people. They just haven't thought about it, but it's ultimately a dishonest position. And again, that's why education is so key, because when people actually have the facts about, fetal development and the violence of abortion, what it actually does to that baby, that beautifully developing baby, a lot of people do change. And one other thing, I mentioned earlier, there's two things that concern me about Biden. And the Hyde Amendment's a big one. But the other big one is kind of some of the things you were talking about, Dan, and what we've been talking about so far is, the lies that the abortion side is telling about abortion. They don't even use the word abortion. Biden made this statement last week on January 22nd, the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, 1973 Supreme Court case decision, like you mentioned. And again, Roe basically restricts the states from having abortion limits, like you say. So that's what it is. It's basically saying, Texas, you cannot protect children in your state. Florida, you cannot protect children in your state. If you're a state that wants to protect kids, you're not allowed to. I mean, it's really, like you say, completely just a horrific law. Even pro-choice advocates have said it's poorly decided law, and it just was a poorly decided case. But what I'm concerned about is Joe Biden says, our president now says, that he's this Catholic. They use the language of spirituality. They talk about Jesus. They talk about saints. They talk about scripture. And he says he's also, for women's choice or women's health, meaning abortion. And I think that is one of my biggest concerns, is people allowing him to get away with that, allowing him to get away with this lie where he's this religious man. He's, filmed in church praying to God. And Jesus Christ, the God he claims to serve, says, let the little ones come unto me. He says it would be better for you to be thrown into the ocean and with a millstone around your neck than to bring any harm, have any one of these little ones stumble. I mean, Jesus was always about the little one. And so to support the law not protecting the little one, when the law protects you and I, we're the big, strong ones, but now the law is not allowed to protect the little one. That is what makes me the most concerned about just that horrific hypocrisy, which, by the way, is not being called out. I mean, this, you've borne this yourself in, even your short time in Congress, just the total attacks of a lot of media groups, the dishonesty, and they're not calling him out. Most people do not call him out on the hypocrisy.
How have you seen them spin the Born Alive bill?
Yeah, that one. This is just it's just disturbing, because what it does, as you've championed it, the Born Alive bill, it's very simple. It's so basic. It provides medical attention. It ensures medical attention for a baby that survives an abortion attempt. So this is a baby that shouldn't have been attempted to be murdered in the first place. The fact that the law allows it in the first place is wrong. But what the left has done, or what a lot of pro-abortion politicians has done, is said, well, there's no such thing as a born alive infant after an abortion. They say it doesn't exist. And we say it does. Actually, the CDC says that there have been dozens of these children. And actually, here's an example of one of my friends, Claire Colwell. She survived an abortion attempt.
Wow.
My friend Gianna Jessen. We actually have examples. They've testified before Congress. But it doesn't matter when when a lot of media groups support you if you just lie.
So they
right?
just kind of move
continue to
past
lie.
it, and they're just like, oh, guys, you don't even need this because this isn't a thing. Is that what they say, basically?
That's one of the points. And then the second point is, this is really a backdoor attempt to ban all abortions. And by the way, we should ban all abortions because they're acts of murder. But the law, the Born Alive bill is about born alive infants. It's not talking about children, that are not survivors of abortion. So am I happy with that? I mean, as an activist, no, I'm not, because we need complete legal protection. I mean, sometimes I appreciate when Congress, when you guys do anything that supports human life. It'll get cheers from our side. Yeah. But I say go big or go home. We need complete legal protection for these kids. We need to stop playing the game. That some babies should be protected, some shouldn't. There's justification to murder a kid at any point. And I just think as long as we play the game, it's going to be futile, because the reality is, as you've seen yourself, Dan, they're never going to agree. They're never going to moderate, right?
Well, that's an interesting.
Our side is offering moderation. They're not going to moderate.
So it's okay. So this is an interesting kind of path to go down, because, and this by the way is like the exact. It's the same conversation on any topic, right? Between like me and the activist, because I do have to live in the reality of politics and incrementalism and just trying to move the ball forward. And so, and like you said, you're going to cheer if we move the ball forward. And so it is beneficial to sort of brainstorm, I think, and strategize on how we could move the ball forward, knowing full well that, look, on a moral basis, like you said, like there's no difference, and I say this all the time, there's no difference between the value of a human life at 12 weeks versus the value of a human life at 11 weeks. Now, what's interesting is, and going back to the polling, for years and years and years, like between 60 and 70% of Americans are not in favor of abortion past 12 weeks. Okay? Mm-hmm. But then that reverses if you go first trimester. Okay, so, and this is similar, and so this matches the laws in Europe. People don't realize this either. The super liberals in Europe are almost exclusively, in almost every country, ban abortion. Like France, Sweden, they banned abortion at about 12 weeks, and it's very hard to get an abortion past that. So now, is that a moral compromise? Maybe. Is it a political compromise? Definitely. And it's because of that public opinion polling, And so, is that worth arguing, at least, like from the activist community and from my position, to say, like, just to move the ball forward? Now, again, it doesn't even seem like we're close to there, because we can't even get a Born Alive bill through. But I think it's pretty important, just as we educate people, to say, like, look, between almost 70% of Americans think that abortion should be illegal after 12 weeks. So vote Republican, and that's what we'll do. We will make this illegal after 12 weeks. And then at least we get that done, at least there. And then get the next battle from that, and the next battle from that. And the Democrats will say, they'll argue, and rightfully so, you're just opening the door to banning abortion completely. And it's like, yeah, maybe. But the slippery slope argument, frankly, is a logical fallacy, just by its very nature, because it starts from this premise that you can't have the next argument when the next argument comes. But that's a separate point. But I don't know. What do you think about everything I just said?
Yeah, I think the question I would have is, do we care about justice, or are we just conniving, politicians who are just going to do what is going to, get us the vote? I think that people's opinions do change, but they change when they see leadership. And they change when they see a reason to change. Why would anyone change on abortion if the people who are convicted and convinced that this is a human life, as science shows us, and they deserve life like you and I do, but we're okay with killing them, and their hearts are beating, when they're here with us in the womb of their mothers, and we're okay with killing them? I mean, why would you, as an abortion advocate, ever change your mind if the people who say they're pro-life are okay with killing babies in the first trimester? Simply because they're little, simply because they're less developed. So I think it sends a terrible message to the very people we need to persuade. And it's also not the role of democracy. This is another huge point. A democracy does not have the right to decide whether or not another group of people, innocent people, get to live or die. That's not the right, the right of a people to decide that another group of people who are innocent get to live or die. A democracy is accountable to higher moral realities, like our Declaration of Independence says, higher moral rights that human rights that we all have. So if we as a democracy accept this compromise, our politicians and the people that are supporting them, we accept this compromise that just because it's not popular right now, we're going to violate the human rights of a whole group of innocent people just because it's not popular to stand for them. We're going to allow the violation of their very lives. What kind of a country are we fighting for now? We've completely lost our moral compass.
But that doesn't mean you're against. But you're not against like some of the state laws that have sought heartbeat bills, right? And I mean, you're not against that. Like you cheer it, of course. But obviously we want the next step, of course. Yeah. But it's not like you're against that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if the law was completely protecting a child and then they say, oh, before the heartbeat, you can kill him, I would be opposing that. But any law that protects more kids, I'm going to support it, right? Because right now, virtually none of them are protected.
Right.
You can go, as long as you travel, you're willing to travel, you can get an abortion through all 9 months in the United States. I'm going to support any law that protects any child.
Right.
And that doesn't mean when yeah.
No, and I get it. You can't cede ground. I mean, you can't agree with the premise that, somehow a child's life is actually not valuable just because it doesn't have a heartbeat yet, but in a week it will. And I totally get that. Like you cannot see, because it's you can't cede it because of moral reasons, and you can't cede it because it's not even intellectually consistent, right? Because there's no intellectual reason. I certainly don't use biblical arguments, and I try to use very humanist arguments when making the case against abortion. So I totally get that. But people just aren't there. And part of leadership is sort of delivering news to people and information to people at a rate they can handle. And that's part of persuasion as well, right? You've got to take them one step at a time. It's like, hey guys, look, America just by and large doesn't even think we should have abortions past 12 weeks. So let's just like nip that one in the bud right away. We're not even there yet. I mean, let's win that one. And then it's like, hey guys, we do agree that we value life past 12 weeks. Now let's start asking the question, why wouldn't we also value it at 11 weeks? Like, does this make any logical sense that we wouldn't value it at 11 weeks when we supposedly value it at 12 weeks? And then people are like, that's true. Right? It just happens.
I just think it's not, it doesn't work that way in reality. I mean, look at the last 48 years, Dan. We haven't gotten closer. We haven't gotten legally to our goal of complete legal protection. And it's because I think we've been playing too much in the middle. When you have two political extremes, you can call them extremes, two sides of the field, right? And one side says kill babies through all 9 months. And the other side says, no, don't kill baby ever, right? If this side is constantly walking over to this side and saying, hey guys, come play over here, like come play. And these guys are like, no, all we do is we move the goalposts closer to abortion. That's all we've done. And
but we're losing, but we've already lost so much. I mean, we could kind of argue about the strategy of it, I guess, all day long. Because I have this conversation with the activist community on every single topic. And so I find it fascinating.
But I think with this topic, we're not talking about we're talking about life and death for human beings who are completely dependent. So there is and not just life and death in the sense of, they need more money for health care so that they don't die from poor health care or whatever. We're talking about somebody's trying to kill them. An abortionist is being paid money to kill them. And, they could live or die today, depending on what a politician may choose to do. So I understand what you're saying about leadership. I think it's a good point that leaders need to understand where their people are at. But leaders also have to make the tough calls, even when it might seem unpopular. And that, I think, is what will win respect and ultimately.
Well, that would be nice if we could. The thing is, we can't even make the tough calls. I mean, again, this gets back to the conversation of just the basic civics of it and the basic reality of, where we're at as leaders. It's not like I have a choice of making a tough call. I have no choice whatsoever. I mean, I don't have the power. We're not in majorities, and we have a Supreme Court decision that must be overturned in order to even make those tough calls. And for it to be overturned, we have to persuade many, many, many more people. And so we really are in a culture war more so than a legal war. If it was just a legal war, then it really would be as simple as saying, yeah, just take the tough vote. But frankly, that's not that hard. I mean, I really don't believe it's that hard for many Republican politicians to take the so-called tough vote. I think the pro-life movement we believe it's strong enough, and we believe we have the top cover to go ahead and do that. It really is that's not even the question, unfortunately. The question is, how do you get this specific decision overturned or at least altered in some way, so that states can even have the debate?
Yeah. I mean, here's the deal. I think that the court does take cues from the culture.
Yeah.
I think that the law is a teacher. I think you would agree with that. And so if we keep playing the game, the intellectually dishonest game, because it is intellectually dishonest to say, I'll only protect the child at 12 weeks. I won't protect the child at 11 weeks.
Totally.
If we keep, basically enacting the lie that these are not human beings, when science is crystal clear and reason is crystal clear that we are never going to win the culture, Dan. And that's my big concern. It's not just an activist, who's impatient. It's about the reality of how do you win a culture. You win a culture, or you lead a culture to justice when you speak truth. And if the politicians and sort of the lobbyists have sort of, chummied up and bought this sort of, it's not just so much about, meeting them halfway or anything. It's about actually speaking the lie of these children are not going to be protected because there's some difference. There's some sort of meaningful difference between a child at 11 weeks and a child at 12 weeks. Then we're going to lose the culture. And that's what I try to tell politicians is be bold, be brave. It might cost you in the short term, but it's going to win the game. It's going to win the victory in the long run. That's the only way to do it. But if we keep playing the middle of the field, we're never going to win.
I don't think they're playing the middle. And I don't think they think they're going to lose in the short term either. I think that's I think that's where we're I think they just think it's useless. Because I look, if you're at the state level, I'm not at the state level, so I don't even get to have this choice. Again, we're at the federal level, we're arguing about born alive bills, which is insane. But at the state level, and especially more red states, what you tend to see at the best we see is you're not seeing bans on abortions because they know they can't even bother, right? So they could introduce it. So they don't think they're losing in the short term. I think you're misreading political incentives here. That is not the problem. They are not scared of pro-choice activists coming to their office. They don't even care. They really don't. I mean, especially these reps who represent super red districts. That's not their issue. Their issue, if they're not introducing it, it's because they know it just gets shut down by the courts because of Roe v. Wade, or they know it's just not going to pass, so there's no point. So part of being a politician and part of being a leader is understanding what we can get through. And I have to disagree that we lose the culture war, because we can still introduce this and say, look, this is the step. This is the first step. And of course, we still believe that we have to get to the next step and the next step and the next step. Mm-hmm. And so I think the only thing we disagree on is the art of persuasion. I think that's fundamentally what we disagree a little bit on the civics question as well. But mostly I think we disagree on the art of persuasion. I think you do have to persuade the public incrementally, whether we like it or not. I don't like it as much as you don't like it. But I also think it's fundamentally true, and just given my position and somebody who has to talk to a wide variety of people and get elected by a wide variety of people, I understand that. I understand that dynamic very well. Either way, it's because this is the last thing I'll say in response to something you said. It was you said we've been doing it this way for 50 years, and I just totally disagree with that. The way we'd been doing it before somebody like you showed up was, again, it was the dark and gloomy activism. It was not good. It was very extreme, and it was so unpersuasive. I do think the way, your new generation of pro-life movement is working this issue is so much better. But it just started. It really, this kind of optimistic, the voice of young women, talking of love and of life and all of this, that just started. And that's the problem. And so, unfortunately, it's going to take more time because we're behind the power curve. But I'm extremely optimistic about where we can go from here.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. William Wilberforce, he was the one responsible with some other activists for helping abolish the slave trade, as you know, in Great Britain. And he repeatedly introduced the same legislation over and over again. He had to do that. To build the necessary momentum. He didn't introduce half-baked measures. He didn't introduce, only abolish the slave trade for children, or only abolish the slave trade for women, or only abolish the slave trade for disabled slaves, or whatever. He introduced the same legislation, complete abolition. So if we look at successful social reform movements historically, they do not introduce half measures. They say, we want complete protection of this group of people, because to say that only some of them deserve protection is to already cede your entire moral high ground. It's already to concede your entire case. And so that's where, I think we do disagree on the art of persuasion. I would just challenge you guys, like, imagine if instead of born alive, we're debating about a baby who survived an abortion attempt. You won't even give them care. It's crazy, right? What if you just said, no killing babies?
Well, yeah, if we're in the majority, we could easily do that. There is legislation that does it. Again, nobody even notices it. That's my point. I just don't think people understand this.
I think
I think in the majority we can force that debate, in the minority we can't. Again, this is the federal level. So at the state level, I don't disagree with you. It's like, yeah, like why not? I don't disagree with you at the state level. But it depends a lot more on the political. Listen, activists are always saying, if you guys were just stronger, then like things would happen. And I wish that were true. And it's like, go fight more. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, I wish that were true. I wish it was just that easy, but it's just not, you know what I mean? Like there's basic laws of civics that sort of prevent some of these things from happening. And I think in the ways that people want. I would also point out that abolishing slavery in the United States did happen in a very different way than you're suggesting. So you thought that was in Britain, but in the United States, it had to start with a Declaration of Independence that says that all men are created equal. And then abolitionists had to use that through years and years and years to even create an abolitionist movement. Like, look, here's what we're trying to live up to in the Declaration of Independence. And then they had to fight, when new states, fight the battle of whether new states would even have slavery or not. And so it really was these like half measures that eventually led to the abolition of slavery. This is a great. I don't think these conversations happen enough, by the way, between like somebody like you and me about like just the strategy, because like we totally agree on the outcome.
Yeah.
And I think I should have this conversation with more activists on different topics as well, just to figure out like what's the actual right strategy to get to the point that we both want to get to.
Well, and I'll say one other quick thing. I think you're clearly a fighter, Dan. That's built into your bones, but. Here's the reality. I think even in the pro-life movement, we have been too quick to sort of run to these sort of interesting, maybe overly strategic measures like Born Alive Infant Protection Act. We think surely everybody will agree with that. No, they don't. And so what we do is we take the conversation to these, this group of these poor children, the small group of children, they do exist, they do matter, who are surviving abortion attempts. And we make the conversation about these kids, which these kids deserve a conversation. Yeah. But we could have been having a conversation about all the kids, about them and the children who were, being torn apart limb from torso in utero by an abortion at 20 weeks, by a suction abortion at 11 weeks. So that's my concern, is like, what conversations are we having, and what are we communicating to the people on the fence? Because you're saying we got to lead the people on the fence. We don't want to be too crazy with them, but people are reasonable. I think most people are reasonable. And I have seen, my persuasion work at Live Action, when you actually tell people the case, for life, you share about human development in the womb, you talk about what an abortion does to that baby, you talk about this idea that, if you are a single cell embryo, if you're a unique individual human life at just the beginning, and you just need time and nourishment to grow, there's not like one point where you suddenly become a human, right? You're human all the way through. Most people are like, yeah, I get that. They're not. Yeah. And then you need to kind of walk through the hard cases with them, right? Because they still have these sort of like hang-ups about like rape or incest. You have to talk through that. But I think that's what I'm, concerned about with the strategy that we've had historically of these half measures, is the conversation is the wrong conversation. Yeah. And as long as we're having the wrong conversations nationally and, in our personal, communities, then we're never going to, I think it'll be very difficult for us to see the success we're looking for. So that's where, law as a teacher, the laws that we propose our teachers, right, and the conversation we have around them. Look at AOC, your colleague, right? She went for it. She's just like the Green New Deal. Yeah. And she got mocked and she got made fun of. But she's really being successful in her contingent. She's winning supporters to her side on younger people because she's unafraid to ask for everything, right? And I think we can. I just think there's a lot we can learn from that.
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely see the point. To me, it just seems more like there's two sides to it: legal and rhetorical. And I think you're absolutely right on the rhetorical side. We need to be constantly making those arguments.
But people aren't dumb. I mean, people see the connection between the two. And if our legal arguments don't match what we say is true, like, the law is not actually realistic on, what is reality. It's kind of, it's like living in a pseudo reality based on sort of political calculations. I think that's where, I think people notice that. And I think that's why people love some of the kind of the very far left stuff that's happening, because they're not afraid to say they want the legal to match their rhetoric, as you say. And yeah, some people, hate that, but other people, especially younger people, are like, that's honesty. That there's integrity in that.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, especially when you're talking about the Green New Deal. Now, to be fair, the Green New Deal, you're right. In a sense, again, rhetorically, the Green New Deal did create a ton of space for all this radicalism. But when it comes down to the brass tacks, what's actually being put on the floor to be voted on it's still bad for a lot of reasons, but it ain't no Green New Deal, right? So it's we could make that argument both ways. I do want to talk about, okay, so like what the debate should be. And we've sort of hit it various times throughout this conversation. And I told you before we started recording, like, I kind of wanted to play devil's advocate and just like watch you hit all the points that are constantly thrown at the pro-life movement. And again, we've already hit some of them, but so let's talk about the conversation that you want to have and that should be debated in the halls of Congress and in state legislatures. Because again, I don't disagree with any of that. I think it would be very healthy. I just don't think it's as easy to just spark that, make that debate happen as people realize we have no power in the minority to do that. But in any case, totally get it. That's what should be happening on a national level, because you're right. People, man, because I do this. I go to high schools a lot. That's one of my favorite things to do. I love to just have kids ask questions, and the abortion issue comes up a lot, and so I've gotten pretty good at understanding how to talk this issue with kids. And the first thing I think you got to realize is we can't use biblical justification because it's not a source of authority to a lot of these kids. And it just doesn't matter to them. So I use humanist arguments. I talk about the just the way like simple questions. Like, okay, let me get this straight. If you talk about your baby when you want the baby, but it's not a baby when you don't want the baby, and how does that work, right? And so there's basic questions like that I think make people think. And so Maybe we'll run through some of these arguments so that people have the tool, because I want listeners to have the tools to make the right argument. So I guess what's the maybe we'll start off. I'm going to know how I want to run this discussion. Maybe we'll start off with this. Mm-hmm. What's the hardest question you have to answer? Is it the exceptions? Is it the rape and incest one? That would seem to me to be the hardest one to answer.
Yeah, for the way I see hardest is subjective. It's based on what is the biggest hang up for the individual person who's asking me, because what's hardest for them is going to be the thing I care most about to sort of undo the confusion that they might have. Honestly, I don't find any of them hard in the sense that when you actually think about it logically and also from a position of love, what is, love is based on reality, what is good for people. And when you look at a rape survivor, for example, you mentioned rape and incest. Rape's horrific, and we need to be advocating and fighting for rape survivors and incest survivors. An abortion advocate would say, well, part of their healing is an abortion. And first off, we don't even give the death penalty to rapists. I'm sure you know this federally, it's against the law, federal law to kill a rapist, for the government to put a rapist to death. Why do we give the death penalty to a child who's conceived in rape? Are they the responsible for the crime? And their dad isn't even getting that, their biological father isn't even getting that penalty. But beyond that, abortion, what is an abortion? It is an act of violence against a baby. It is an act of violence against a woman. The act of abortion is ultimately, I see it as a kind of medical rape. You're actually you're violating a woman's body, a healthy pregnancy, to destroy that baby. So it is an added trauma to the initial trauma of the rape, and it doesn't take away the trauma of the rape. I think this is one of the most insincere parts of the sort of pro-rape apologist abortion activists. I'm not saying people who are confused, concerned about this are insincere, but some abortion activists are like, just give her an abortion. How dare you withhold an abortion? It's like, an abortion is not going to heal her trauma, right? An abortion doesn't take away the memory of that rape. It actually just adds another trauma to the rape. So, for the sake of the woman, and of course for justice for the child, abortion in a situation of rape is not justified, and it's not loving or helpful for the survivor either.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the harder questions because it's so easy to imagine how traumatizing that is for. I'm a man, but like I can easily imagine how traumatizing that is for somebody I love, and like if they just it's a reminder. If they remain pregnant with it, it's a reminder every single day that this happened, that it's not somebody they wanted it to happen with. That's extremely devastating. I think look, I mean, one of the ways I talk about that one is, let's say, look, when we're at an agreement that abortions of convenience are at 0 weeks and basically illegal, then we should have the conversation about these exceptions. But you're not even agreeing with me that we should have no abortions of convenience. So that's right. usually the tool I use, just rhetorically speaking.
What has happened is, the challenge with that is, the abortion advocates know that those cases are so devastating, and so they've weaponized them.
Yes, they do.
As rape and incest is weaponized to defend all abortions, and I think that's part of the issue. Like, if we're like, I agree, rape is uniquely horrible, absolutely. But if we're like, that baby, I get why it's more okay to like end the life of that baby versus another baby, then we actually, again, we're giving the abortion advocates their ammo. We're basically letting them, again, use those cases to justify all the other abortions, because that's what they've done for 50 years. So I hear you on that, and I think it's absolutely devastating. But I also look at the studies. I mean, there's a study that, the very few studies that have been done on this, because again, most in the world of sort of healthcare supposedly are so pro-abortion they won't bother to research this. But of survivors who actually, survivors of rape who got pregnant, who had their baby, the vast majority of them say that they do not regret it, that they're, very, grateful that they were able to have this child. I mean, ultimately they bond with the child, they become attached. Of the women that have abortions after rape, the vast majority of them say that they actually regret it, because they know, I mean, again, we have to live in reality. The trauma of that rape is not undone by an abortion, right? It adds to the trauma. Maybe not in the moment. There's that feeling of relief in the moment. But as time goes by, it's like, wait a minute, there was a baby and now I'm responsible for killing that baby. So I think we have to really get inside the mind of a survivor and realize that it's a lot more complex than the abortion advocates would make it.
It definitely is. Okay, so that's the hardest. I think that's the hardest question. But let's talk through some of the other ones. And so how do you respond when somebody's like, well, look, because you can ask people questions, you walk them through that, right? And you usually say, well, I mean, once in their third trimester, do you agree with abortions? And they'll say no, and then you'll say, okay, well then why do you agree with an abortion at 1 month? And they'll say, well, it's just because it's different. It's like a clump of cells. It's not really a baby yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can keep moving them backwards and just say, well, what about when the baby is, just 2 months and they already have their brain waves, already firing, their neurons are already firing. What about at 3.5 weeks when their heart is already beating? You can kind of use the gestation of the baby and the fetal development markers or the embryonic development markers to be like, would you be okay if the heart's beating? Would you be okay if here and there? And eventually you'll find they'll be like, yeah, that doesn't sound good. Any sort of indication of the baby's humanity, right, makes the person advocating for aborting them uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. And you can find indications of humanity, throughout the entire life of a human because they're human. So I think, you can kind of have that conversation with someone about when is it okay versus when is it not. But I go back to the logical case for life, which is this. Is the preborn child or is the single cell embryo a human life? Is it ever okay to kill an innocent human life?
Yeah.
Is it ever okay to kill? And usually people say, no, it's not okay to ever kill an innocent human life, human being, or just human. And if you can get somebody to start with the premise that it's never okay to kill an innocent human, it's never okay, then as long as you can show them, and you can show them pretty simply with science and reason, that a single cell embryo is an individual, unique human, then you can help them see why it's never okay, no matter how small or undeveloped they are, to intentionally end their life.
And
so that's usually where we start.
And that gets to the body argument, right?
Premise.
Like, well, it's just my body. And so when somebody says it's just my body, that implies that they disagree with the premise that it's a separate human life. And showing them that, I think, is important, because it's like, well, if we found life on Mars, but it was a single cell organism, would you still consider that finding life on Mars? It's like, well, yeah. Right. So
well, and I just find that my body, my choice argument. I mean, I have to laugh sometimes, because it's just, you hear it so many times, and you're just like, it's not just her body. Like, any pregnant woman knows it's not just her body anymore. There's another body inside her. And when I was pregnant with my son, did I have male, body parts in me as he was developing? Like, yes, I had. I don't have I don't have male organs. I have a child with male organs inside of me. So there's obviously another body. And, the science is crystal clear. It's a unique, distinct individual human life, an individual human body. Even at a few cells, it just needs that time to grow. So, I'm actually for my body, my choice, Dan, like, to the point where I believe that we should have a level of autonomy, especially as women. Like, my body is sacred, and, don't mess with me. Like, I totally, I'm with that sort of idea. But when you start to just be blatantly dishonest and be like, okay, a pregnant woman is now just a pregnant woman is now only still one body, the woman's body, and not a child's body. It's just not real.
Well, it's not scientifically accurate, right? And I think that's a strong argument that again, we've been equipped with as a pro-life movement later on since Roe v. Wade, simply because we have the science to prove it. You can visualize infants in in a much different way than we could before, and I think that's a pretty important part of it. And I think another form of argumentation just gets to value, and this is another way to sort of argue. I think why is week 1 less valuable than week 3, and challenge people to make like a real argument, like a really intellectual argument as to why that value system is different. Why is month 8 so much less valuable than once the baby is born? Like, what is a good reason for saying that? Because you're all just it's a clump of cells, fine, but you're just a clump of cells. You're just like a prettier clump of cells than the
big one.
Because it's really hard to answer that question that I just posed. But I don't know, how do people try, or do we even get to that point in these debates?
Yeah. I mean, people try everything. And I think one other thing I'll say, I do think lies, the power of a lie is when it's repeated so many times your whole life long, and I think that's what's happened with the abortion issue. Like, my body, my choice. It's not a baby yet. It's a clump of cells. Like, we know these things are not true. We know there's another body. We know that it's actually, yes, it's a clump of cells, but it's a, human clump of cells that's unique and individual human life, like you and I. But when you just hear the lie over and over again, and then you're fearful, I think that's the other thing. They're fearful that the pro-life position is somehow going to destroy women, right? And as long as you're fearful, and as long as the lies are being told again and again, I get why people buy them, right? I get why people, fear is a powerful force. So, on the value thing that you mentioned, why is an 8-month-old more valuable than a 7-month-old? I also say, like, a baby is much less developed than an adult man, right? But we actually see the baby as, because they're more vulnerable, as more sort of worthy of our protection and care,
right? They're precious, yeah.
Like babies, yeah. So actually, the smaller you are, the more you should be cared for. The more dependent you are, actually, the more you deserve care. So I would say, like, because they're so dependent on that mom, not only does the mom, should try to eat healthy and care for herself, but actually, there's the other piece of it, other people should care for the mom. And that's why, like, we're big advocates for mothers, because, part of being pro-life is recognizing that there's this very innate and important bond between mothers and kids that starts, from the moment of fertilization. They're actually dependent on their mom's body. So that means like how we treat pregnant women matters tremendously, because it's our responsibility to care for her because she's caring for somebody else.
Yeah. Those are all good. What else? Before we end, what other questions do you get that you have had to find answers to that are persuasive, that are on it? Or did we really cover them all? We've covered a lot.
Another big one, if we want to do one more.
Yeah, let's do one more.
There's all kinds, but okay, let's do one more. We need abortions because it's medically necessary.
Oh,
I know
yeah,
you
that's a good. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
They use that one a lot, and it's so crazy because that's used as justification for all abortions, as you know.
It's
we
part of the
can't
exceptions.
make any limits on abortion.
But what I say to that one is like, look, medically speaking, you don't have to have an abortion. You might have to have now, because look, that's a tough question, right? And I do say, look, you save the life of the mother if there's a real problem, but you don't have to have an abortion. Now, you might have to have a premature delivery, okay? And that might but you should try to save the baby's life, right? Is my point,
right?
And it's like, let's at least try to protect life on all levels. I don't think you should sacrifice the mother. I definitely don't think that. And but man, I tell you what, a lot of people think that's what we mean. It's like, we got to clarify that this is not what we mean by this. So it's very rare too that this would even happen.
It's extremely rare, but you can work to care for both. I mean, you should treat them both as patients. That's what doctors have done historically. And now we have, the best medical technology in human history. So all the more reason to try to save both. And by the way, this idea that we should pit mother against child, I mean, think about a newborn. Like if there's like a pack of wolves chasing you, you don't throw your newborn to the wolves. Like, spare the adult, spare the woman, or spare the father, the mother or the father, and let them, eat your newborn so you can escape them. I mean, I think we sort of done this weird inverse with pregnancy where it's like, we should do whatever we can and take it out on the baby if there's any inconvenience to the mom. Yeah. Now, I think maternal health care needs to be improved. I think we need to 100% advocate for the mom. I'm a mom. I know what pregnancy is like. And I, had friends with really high risk pregnancy. So I understand how important the healthcare aspect is, but you can care for both. And like you said, Dan, an abortion is the intentional killing of a baby. Like you can deliver that baby early. And if that baby dies because of that early delivery, the intention was not to kill that baby. In an abortion procedure, you go in there and you destroy the baby before delivery. That is how an abortion procedure is designed. And that's why there are thousands of OBGYNs who have said abortion is actually not medically necessary. In the extremely rare cases where you might have to do an early delivery, you still try to save the baby, right? Your goal is save baby. In an abortion, the goal is deliver a dead baby.
Right.
And I think that's where the distinction is key. And we have to be careful too, because abortion advocates have gotten really crafty with this. And they're like, oh, it actually is an abortion if the baby dies in an early delivery. That actually was an abortion, even though you tried to save the baby. And you're like, actually, no, that's not an abortion if you're trying to save the baby. So it also goes down to these very, very rare, very unique situations. But the goal is the doctor should be fighting for both. I think that needs to be the bottom line for any medical professional.
Right. And okay, so the last thing I want to end up with actually is like other options, because the other argument is, look, this lady's life is going to be ruined if she has a baby right now. She can't really afford to take care of it. So are you going to take care of it, Mr. Pro-life guy? How is this supposed to happen? I mean, so because part of it's, we call it convenience, but look, I get it. Like there's people's lives who are really thrown into disarray if they had a baby right now, and they're not going to provide a good life for that baby. Fair enough. So let's say that's the case. Like this child's life will be really, really bad if they're actually brought into the world. And so that's the excuse they use to have an abortion. But as it turns out, we have these other options like adoption. And, one thing I'm looking for is how do we make adoption in the United States just a better process and just more prevalent? There's so many parents out there, especially because us millennials, we're having kids too late. And it's problems. There's problems with infertility. How do we get on this? How do we make adoption better? Is this something Live Action looks into or advocates for?
Yeah. I think it's a great point. And I think adoption definitely is very sort of, there's so many different agencies and different, price tags attached to it and challenges attached to it. I will say one of the reasons it is so difficult to adopt a newborn is because there's a scarcity. I mean, there are thousands upon thousands. Some say estimate up to 2 million couples looking to adopt infants, and they can't because there just aren't infants to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that go to? The abortion rate, the fact that these babies are being aborted instead. So I do think, we need more advocacy for adoption. We need to make the systems as, great as possible. But we also need to encourage moms, encourage birth moms, encourage women who are facing unplanned pregnancies. And that's really hard to do when abortion's legal, right? And she's being told she's actually, being empowered by having an abortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she wasn't expecting to get pregnant. It's just going to be a lot more of a go-to for some women to say, oh, I'm just going to go get an abortion than I'm going to go through my 9 months of pregnancy and have this baby. So that's where the law matters, making abortion, restricting abortion, getting rid of it matters. And then also educating and supporting those women and girls to say, listen, this is a human life and there are people who support you and want to care for you and help you out. And want to walk with you through all your entire pregnancy. And there are amazing families, because there are amazing families. I know many personally who are dying to adopt, but there's no babies. Like it is so difficult to find. I know a courageous birth mother who will give that baby a shot at life. So I think the first key is to undo the myth that there isn't a hope for that child,
right? And
to help encourage would-be adoptive mothers that, listen, there's amazing options and you can pick your family, you can have an open adoption. You can do it any which way that you're comfortable with. So I think that's part of it. But part of it is just availability of abortion. When abortion is just handed out, it's so easy. It's marketed as such a great thing, even though it's such a horrific thing. That's one of the reasons that it's such a struggle to have more adoption in our country. And I also think it goes back to deeper things too, Dan. You kind of mentioned it, like millennials having kids later. I think it also just has to do with like our behaviors as people, like us seeing sex as cheap and sort of just whatever, like, sex is not really about commitment. It's not about love. It's not about, children. It's about sort of just, pleasure or sort of just my momentary connection with this other person. And I think that's also really damaging because as long as we see sex as sort of cheap or just sort of like, something you might do when you're dating and not about family and love and sacrifice, then you're going to have a lot of unwanted babies, right? You're going to have children that are seen, and I put that in air quotes because every child is wanted by someone and definitely wanted by God, but you're going to see, more abortions as long as people don't treat sex with, I think, the sacredness and beauty that it deserves. It's seen as cheap, unfortunately, and women are treated cheaply, which is another, social problem we could talk about.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, all of these different issues kind of lead into where we're at today, and we've got to battle back a lot of different fronts to, I think, get our society back on the right track. That was a great conversation, just overall. I think people hopefully learned a lot, and I hope you enjoyed my pushback on this the general political strategy. But I think it's really important to have those conversations, and frankly, it's fascinating as well when we're all trying to get to the same outcome. And I'm like I said, because of people like you, I'm optimistic about the pro-life movement, and I think we all should be, and we should all keep fighting the fight. So thank you, Lila Rose, so much for being on.
Thanks, Dan, and I'm here to cheer you on 1,000% when you introduce protect everyone, protect each one, the protect every life bill. So those
bills are out there. Like that's what I try to tell you. But happy to.
Champions, though, they're kind of they lose their steam when you have all these other sort of middling measures. So fair enough. The more focus they get.
I'll take that. I think you have a point. I do think you have a point on that. So that's why we have these conversations. Yeah. So Lila Rose, thank you so much for being on, and keep fighting the fight. Thanks, Lila.
Thanks, Dan.
All right.